not knowing that she was alive. Her old bedroom room was dim, only a small draught of consumed him all these years. Pity was all he had left. "I'll tell you how this is going to go," Brandine hissed. "I'm going to drag Eric out of here by the one leg he has left. I am going to pick him apart until I find out where my son is. We'll see just how far that precious love is stretched when he's begging for death." "Please?" Hiccup whispered as Brandine stalked away. "No, Brandine, please, you don't have to do this. It's me you want, why can't you just take me?" "Because you are going to suffer the way I have," Brandine roared. "You're going to watch everything you love crumble around you and know that it was your fault." Something shifted in Brandine's expression then, like a poker had jabbed something deep and tender. Hiccup latched onto it, despite the terror pumping through his veins. "Your fault?" Hiccup asked. Brandine's hands curled into fists. He was frozen between the cells, half on his way to get Eric, who was frowning but otherwise unperturbed by the next bout of torture coming his way. The others worrying Brandine and Hiccup, all except for Inga and Zoe, who were working swiftly on Finn. "What do you blame yourself for?" Hiccup mused. It wasn't a question, but Brandine bristled nonetheless. "You don't feel guilty for the war? For hurting people? But everything about Dager's death gets to the heart of everything, doesn't it? But his death wasn't your fault." "Shut up," Brandine hissed. "The duel wasn't your fault. You were just a boy and the duel was the only thing we could do to keep our kids here." Away from Hiccup blinked, his expression clearing. "Oh. That's why he wanted our kids." "Hiccup, stop," Astrid whispered, looking for the first time at Brandine with true fear. Hiccup ignored her. "Dager never wanted our kids. We knew this from the beginning. We always assumed he wanted to take them away because he could and because he wanted to hurt us. The kids being born on Berserker territory only solidified his rights to take them. But the only reason he even entertained the idea was because of you." Brandine's expression was tight. His blue eyes were deadly slits. "You were lonely," Hiccup said. "So one way or another, whether you met us or saw my kids from afar or whatever, you told him that you wanted them. So you'd have friends." The jail was silent as Brandine stared him down. "All of this, everything, was set into motion because you told him you wanted to be friends with our kids, right?" Hiccup asked, his voice stronger than it had been in what felt like days. "And whatever Brandine wanted, Brandine got, right? So Dager made it his mission to take our kids away. And one thing led to another, all the way up until the duel, until he died. And not only did Brandine find himself with no friends, he also found himself with no father." Hiccup felt like he'd run a mile. He pushed his hands through his hair at these revelations. It made no difference, it changed nothing. But finally he had the full picture. Now everything made sense. Why Brandine hated him so badly. Why Brandine lashed out at anyone who tried to get close. Why he'd pursued Adriana so ardently but not out of true love, but out of a desire to subdue her and make her his. And why he wanted to destroy everything in his path, filled with nothing but hatred right down to the very core of his being. Deep down, he hated himself and blamed himself for his father's death. If he'd never wanted the Haddock twins to move to Berserker Island, Dager never would have tried to take them away. He never would have died. And none of this would have happened. "That's an interesting theory," Brandine hissed. "But it changes nothing. I've already told you, I am what I am and there's no changing that. Quit trying to appeal to the goodness of someone that doesn't exist." "I'm not, I'm just trying to understand why. Why after all this time have you obsessed over me and my family for so long?" Brandine rolled his eyes. "You're leaping. And without your precious dragon to catch you, that's dangerous. I'm also on a tight schedule, so I've wasted enough time on you. As I said, I need to find my son, and I'll do whatever it takes to get it out of Eric." He turned back to Eric's cell and gestured for the keymaster to hand over the ring of keys. "Oh, I don't think I'm going anywhere," Eric finally said, his voice hoarse. "No. Got somewhere else to be?" Brandine asked, snatching the keys. "Maybe. I hear Valhalla is nice this time of year, Erik said, leaning back against the wall. And as he flicked his tired eyes up at Brandine, something sharp slid out from beneath his shirt sleeve into his fingers. Hiccup felt the world slip out from under his feet. No. He only dimly registered the cold iron of the cell wall pressed into his forehead. The glass that had been in Erik's back, that Inga slid underneath his cot. Brandine froze, his eyes on the glass while a low gasp echoed through the stillness of the jail. Except for Finn's low whimpers, all was completely silent. Genevieve's dark eyes were wide and even Inga's blue eyes were round with horror, her patient momentarily forgotten. No. Astrid whispered, crouching down so she could look up into Erik's face. No. Erik, please. Brandine's shock morphed into anger. You wouldn't dare. Really? Should we test that theory? Erik asked, flicking the glass between his fingers. Despite his tired, red-rimmed eyes, he was calm. One step toward this cell and I'm gone. You won't ever find Darin. That strange look of deadly precision creeped onto Brandine's features. His hands were curled tightly into fists. He took multiple low, deep breaths until the look faded from his face. Only his eyes portrayed the utter loathing he had for Erik. Fine. You win this round. But don't think for a second you're off the hook. I'm not done with you yet. Erik only stared back at him, twirling the glass between his fingers. Brandine stalked out of the jail without another word. The tension didn't ease even after he'd left. Erik. Finn muttered. If you kill yourself, I'll kill you. A flicker of amusement flashed across Erik's face. I'll hold you to it, brother. But Finn didn't hear him. He finally slipped into unconsciousness. Please. Astrid whispered. Please don't do this. I won't let him have Darin. He won't be satisfied with this. He'll find a way. What do you want me to do, Astrid? Erik said, trying and failing to keep the impatience out of his voice. Do you want me to give him up? Hiccup watched in utter pain as Astrid's shoulders dipped, her telltale sign of defeat. I want you to live. Her voice was thick with tears. I didn't patch you up all those years ago to see you go like this. Hey, Erik's voice was gentle as he took her hand through the bars. This is different. I will do whatever it takes to protect him. It's no different than you and Hiccup all these years protecting your kids. If you were pushed into a corner, this corner, what would you do? Would you give in? Give them up? Or would you take their location to the grave where he could never find them? Astrid dropped her forehead to the bars as she began to cry in earnest. Because she knew the answer. She would never break. She would never give up her children either. If she'd been in Erik's position, she would do whatever it took to protect them. After all, their son got his fearlessness from her. And yet it was horrible to witness, to see her come to terms with the fact that after losing her beloved daughter, she would now lose her second son, too. By choice and by marriage to her daughter, Erik had been the second son to her that she'd always wished to have. And now they were on limited time. How could a mother go through this and not weep? In all his years Hiccup had never heard her cry like this, and there had indeed been some painful times. He wished he could hold her properly, take her away from this place and make every bit of pain go away. Instead he got to watch as Erik crouched down and hugged her, slipping his arms through the bars. I don't do this for me. I will do it for him. Astrid clung to him and nodded in understanding. On. Only if you have to. Erik closed his eyes, an expression of relief on his face. It was cold, hard and objective. And yet he didn't want to die. To make his family witness this. But if he had to do it, he would, and he wouldn't have time to falter. Perhaps he found comfort knowing that he had her blessing. Or perhaps her understanding. It was too much for Hiccup though. He couldn't understand it. Well, he could. But he couldn't. Hiccup sat on his cot with what felt like a pallet of bricks on his shoulders. His soul had never felt more weary. His Addy was dead. His grandson was missing. Finn was severely wounded. Astrid was unraveling. Toothless was captured. And Erik was prepared to die. He pushed his hands through his hair and stared at the floor between his boot and prosthetic. Brandine was right. It was only a matter of time before he went completely mad. Underscore 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 underscore. Waiting until midnight to carry out her mission was perhaps one of the worst parts of this whole ordeal, Adriana thought. Sitting and resting all while watching the sun sink slowly down until it finally dipped beneath the horizon, then waiting a bit more until she was sure the streets were as empty as possible. Finally she'd put her boots on. Cliff stayed back at the house, annoyed and pacing well before she'd left. Yet it was only a matter of time before they were caught by Brandine's men. The odds of carrying out her plan to kidnap Viggo Grimborn were better if she did this alone. Even if he did think she was utterly insane to do so. Perhaps she was. But if she could pull this off, hold him hostage to get the dragons back, it would be a significant count in her favor. And if he didn't comply, she would have to use force. After all, what did a man treasure more than his own life? His job. His position. Certainly not his love of licking Brandine's boots. Adriana had to believe that she could make Viggo submit if he wanted to keep his life. As Adriana slipped down the dark docks leading to the harbor, she had to suppress an eye roll. She had a tough enough time killing spiders, usually hiding atop chairs and squealing in horror even as Eric smashed the poor thing to bits. How was she going to properly threaten a human's life enough to make him submit to her? Annoyed, Adriana shook her head. Her friends, her family, her people. Eric and Darin, they were all depending on her. She couldn't falter. If any one of them were in her position, they would do whatever it took to save their people. She thought of Finn, standing tall and proud against the whipping post, taking every strike without a sound. Without begging for release or giving in to his enemies. If he could do that, she could do this. If taking a man's life is what it took to save her people, it was a burden she would have to bear until the end of her days. She would loathe herself for it. She would lose sleep and weep over her cursed deeds. Already she felt guilt for the dragon poisons she'd spread around the village to infect Brandine's men, just to give herself the slightest of advantages. To kill a man, it would tear her soul apart. And suddenly she remembered the dark days of the Haddock household. When her daddy was so sad and angry that his actions had killed a man. A vile, horrible man who would have taken Finn and herself away, splitting their time between him and their parents. Opening their young, impressionable eyes to the horrors of life, away from the safety of their home where their parents could protect them. The sleepless nights, lashing out, and going to his own sweet, empathetic daughter for comfort, because she understood what it felt like to feel things as deeply as he did, were all signs of the guilt that ravaged Hiccup's soul. She would be no different if it came to that. It would affect everything. And yet it was still something she would have to risk. If taking a man's life was what it took to save everyone, she'd do what had to be done, and let her soul bleed for it later. Finally she reached the end of the docks, thankful that the torches remained unlit. It was difficult enough slipping through the lit streets. If the docks were lit, she'd have a very hard time putting the fires out before being seen by someone either overhead on the village watches or the ships. All was quiet as she crept to the smallest skiff she could find and untied it from the docks. It was one of dozens that the Berserkers had used to attack Berk. Now they were unmanned, only used during the day for travel to and from the ships. One skiff wouldn't be missing among all the rest. Not unless someone had too much time on their hands and decided to count. Asterisk asterisk dropping into the skiff, Adriana quickly heaved on the oars and pulled away from the docks. Back in the days of dragon training, rowing hadn't been one of her strong suits. In fact, nothing had been a strong suit of hers, but she'd been especially deplorable at that. However, as part of her training with Finn after Darin's birth, he had added this to the list. Rowing quickly strengthened her core muscles, as well as her arms and shoulders. Now she cut through the waves with a practiced method, though her muscles still strained after a few minutes. She tried not to think hard about any scouts who might see the tiny dot moving to the ships in the brackish water. The moon was behind the clouds and no signal had been sounded yet. She quickened her pace, groaning through her teeth as Viggo's massive black ship finally emerged in her periphery. Moored among the other ships in the harbor, the gargantuan ship stood like a sentinel guarding a castle gate. Covered in heavily armored metal and tarred wooden planks, the ship was beautiful despite the horrors that no doubt occurred in its depths. Massive spools of green chain were posted on the decks beside crossbows and nets. The rest of the docks were obscured from her vision as she faded into shadow and could only stare up at the ship's slick black sides, covered in mist and barnacles. Windows winked up at her in the darkness from a distance up and she withheld a sigh. Now would be the true test. Oh, how parts of her wished she hadn't depended on Lily all these years for getting her to and from high places. While not particularly afraid of heights, Adriana wasn't keen on slipping and plunging into the cold waters below, perhaps smashing into the skiff on the way down. Shaking herself, Adriana quickly looped the skiff's rope around the chain of the ship's anchor, which descended into the depths below. She tried not to think too hard about how deep the water went as her view of the chain disappeared after only a foot. And then she stood, removing the rope and grappling hook coiled around her chest. She gave the hook an experimental throw to test its weight and prepared herself. She hadn't done this in a while, but Finn had made her practice until she'd mastered it. When exactly am I going to need to do this? It's like doing math, she'd complained. This is math, Finn had explained patiently. And who knows, maybe you'll never need to. But if you do, you'll be glad for it. Better to be over-prepared than under. With a deep intake of breath through her nose, Adriana swung the grapple to get momentum and then hurled it up into the darkness. She grit her teeth and then nearly whooped aloud when it disappeared, fell back against the lip of the docks with a dull clang, and held. Her heart pounding, she wasted no more time and quickly began to climb the edge of the ship. It was grueling work, but her muscles welcomed the challenge. Her thoughts strayed to races with Eric as they climbed cliff faces while her family watched on below, smirking at their snarky insults. One of the proudest moments of her life was beating him to the top by nearly 10 seconds. Her lightweight frame and newfound strength were more tools in her arsenal than she'd ever thought possible, and she'd promptly burst into tears. Adriana fought back a grin as she recalled her brother's eye roll and parents' laughter. Eric's own pride was a thing of beauty. Her heart gave a pang. She missed him terribly. Soon enough, her muscles straining and breath heaving, she found herself at the top of the ship. Despite her quivering muscles, she slowly poked her head above decks. She'd chosen the back of the ship. It might have been the tallest part to climb, but with luck it would also have the least amount of people, if any. Sure enough, she saw no one. Quickly climbing over the lip, she dropped into a crouch behind a barrel and wiped the sweat from her face. Okay, she thought. Step 1, board ship, done. Now for step 2, find Viggo. Additional but necessary third step, don't get caught. She allowed herself a minute to steady her heart and muscles before giving an experimental stretch and rising. No one was on the top deck, allowing for freedom of movement, though she kept to barrels, boxes, crates and heavy machinery to easily take cover behind if that should change. Luckily nothing happened and she was able to locate the stairs descending into the belly of Viggo's ship. Allowing herself only a single deep breath, she set her feet on the plank and descended as quietly as possible. The interior of the ship was dark except for lanterns posted on the walls of an exceptionally long hallway lined with many doors. Everything was quiet too, which boded well. While most books depicted the crew as having nothing better to sleep on than hammocks, she wondered if these could in fact be bedrooms. If so, she was impressed, or perhaps they were all closets for storing things, such as the armory. She didn't pause to investigate though and carried on to the end of the hall, which forked left and right. A quick perusal of the left section revealed the galley, which was empty save a trio of heavily snoring dragon hunters with kegs of ale on their laps. Their arms were covered in a swath of red bumps. Later they would wake with a series of itching boils, unquenchable thirst and lethargy that could only be lifted with the antidote for changeling poison. Smiling proudly to herself, she hurried back to the other end of the forked hallway and descended the next steps on light feet. Upon entry of this third level, she froze entirely, her heart launching into a pained gallop. Here the hall was lined floor to ceiling with cages and each was filled with sleeping dragons. They slept in piles in a cacophony of colors that contrasted against the jet-black planks. Carefully she tiptoed forward, her steps splashing in puddles as she went, eyeing them all. Deadly nadders, monstrous nightmares, gronkles, hideous ziplybacks, and more. With a start she found a tangle of blue, green and white limbs in a cage and hurried forward to inspect the shockjaw pups, all of whom looked comfortable and unharmed. She sighed with relief that they looked the same as they always did in Finn's dragon pen, a gaggle of sleepy pups huddled together to keep warm. Zap and Maximus were nowhere to be seen, nor were Lily, Stormfly, or to her dismay, Toothless. Worse was the feeling that she was heading entirely in the wrong direction. Surely Viggo had an office or a cabin, which would certainly not be in the bowels of the ship beneath the captured dragon's pens. She must have missed it or gone to the wrong section of the ship entirely. She patted the sleeping Chewie on the nose and grinned when he sleepily smacked his lips together. No doubt he was dreaming of his favorite chew toys, just as Snack was likely dreaming of his favorite food, cod dipped in vanilla ice cream, a concoction only a certain Smedley could come up with. Allowing herself no more room for memories, she quickly retreated back the way she'd come. The dark hallways were just as quiet as when she'd arrived, and it was only the slightest movement in the shadows that alerted her to another's presence. Her heart launching into her chest, Adriana lashed out with a dagger. It clanged against her assailant's weapon, which flashed in the lamplight. He was a hulking brute with arms bare in a leather jerkin, and with a flash of terror, she thought it was Brandine. She stumbled back to give herself more room when a pair of knuckles crashed into her jaw. Spots danced across her vision as she hit the deck, pain rattling through her teeth. Move, move. Her arms felt sluggish as she rolled over, trying to catch her breath. She tasted blood. A hand grabbed the back of her collar and adrenaline forced her into a crawl, but it wasn't enough as she was dragged to her feet anyway. Not just any stowaway. A girl. The man in the tunic said, which she vaguely was relieved to see had sandy blonde hair, grey eyes, and a broad nose. Thank the gods it wasn't Brandine. Her relief was so strong, she almost wept, which unfortunately wasn't lost on the dragon hunters. Come now, miss. No tears. You made it this far, which is impressive. Unfortunately, that also means you're dead. No. Adriana said, her words slurring slightly. She shook her head and tried to squirm out of the hold the second man had on her. Her arms were pinned up above her head, his hands tightly pressing against the base of her skull. She couldn't get out of this even at full strength. I see. Can't die here. Luckily the choice isn't up to me. That'll be Viggo's decision. Bring her. Adriana's heart thundered in her chest. She tried to think beyond the pain in her skull. It wasn't bad, just a headache and likely a lovely bruise would form, but these were nothing. She'd failed. This had been too risky. Maybe she should have brought Cliff. This was the second time she'd been caught and he wasn't here to get her out of this one. Now Viggo would turn her into Brandine. Darin. Eric, her parents. Finn. Genevieve, she'd failed them all. Not unless she could get away from these men and take them out, here and now. But how was she going to do that without alerting the whole ship that she was here? Desperately she kicked out against a door jamb and shoved backwards, nearly knocking the man holding her onto his back. Only he caught his footing and gave her a shake, causing her addled brains to scramble. Oh! Knock it off, or I'll really give you a pounding. They rose onto the top decks and she was horrified to see nearly a dozen men in various styles of gear fit for dragon hunting, all with their hands on their weapons. Watching her with calculating eyes. No. How had she missed so many? Unless they had all awoken from the rooms below. And then a single man slid down the mast on a rope with some sort of rigging system, the rope turning in and over itself in a wheel. He held another rope in his hands, apparently steadying his fall. His feet touched the decks in a flawless landing. She blinked in wonder, amazed at the contraption despite her fear, and then realized her error. She hadn't even thought to look upward at the sails, to see if any dragon hunters were watching from above. Stupid fool. Adriana hissed to herself. And then she began to thrash. Desperately trying to break free. It was over now and she was either going to die or Viggo was going to give her to Brandine. She'd well and truly screwed up this time. They approached another set of stairs that descended into the ship, both men now holding her limbs in an effort to keep her restricted. It was all she could do not to beg for release. If she caused too much of a ruckus on the ship, Brandine would hear about it. The best she could hope for now was to escape, grab Darin, and run. There was nothing else for it. She was a spitting cat forced to bathe. She was a cornered terrible terror, hissing and spitting fire in a last-ditch attempt to make itself bigger, warn off the dangerous foe that, if it would not be scared off or defeated, would receive injuries until the bitter end. Darren's sweet face flashed through her mind. Eric's proud smile. Her parents and Finn. No matter what happened next, she'd face her death or Brandine with a ferocity rivaled only by a blazing monstrous nightmare. She found herself before a massive black door and the sandy-haired man swung a meaty fist onto its front. It was barely heard over the ruckus of Adriana scuffling with the other hunter, who turned out to be a brutish balding man with a thick mustache. Enter. Sandyhair opened the door and she was quickly dragged inside an elegantly decorated room, which she only just noticed. Her head was pounding and her limbs were growing exhausted from the force of her struggles. Tears of rage were spilling down her face and it was all she could do to not scream. Viggo Grimborn sat behind his desk, reading a sheaf of paper. His mismatched eyes flicked upward as if bored and then he blinked, his one dark brown eye settling on her. Almost incredulous. Adriana realized she must look a fright. Filthy, exhausted, bruised, her ridiculously burned and shortened hair now aflop around her face, too short to braid. She'd had to settle on little ponytails, but it wasn't enough to keep back for long. She only hoped the incredulous look in his eyes was due to fear from the fire rising in her blazing green eyes. Adriana Haddock. Viggo said in amazement. You truly are a miracle, aren't you? Adriana froze, her rage giving way to confusion. What? Well, forgive me. Viggo said, dropping his papers with a slap and striding toward them. You are supposed to be dead, are you not? Let me go and I'll stay dead. Viggo chuckled. Indeed. How exactly did you escape? I saw the attack on the Great Hall myself. Nobody could have survived that. Well, it's as you said, Adriana said in a snide tone. I'm a little miracle worker. How do you even know who I am? You are the spitting image of your mother 20 years ago. Only you have your father's eyes. I dare say only a fair few, such as myself, have seen that particular look of rage in that particular set of eyes. Right, if that's not the weirdest thing I've heard in a while. Viggo's eyes narrowed but he looked to be fighting a smile. And there's the Haddock's Nook. To those that know Haddocks, it's not difficult to place. He looked at his men and said, where did you find her? Below decks with the dragons, sir. Viggo nodded as if this didn't surprise him. Release her. You may go, but guard the door. To her surprise, Mustache and Sandyhair obeyed, quickly releasing her and retreating from the room. If they looked surprised or disappointed, their expressions didn't show it. The door clicked shut a moment later and she realized she still had her weapons. Were these people completely stupid? Perhaps all wasn't lost. Now, as I've said, I know Haddocks. Before you go for your weapons, I propose a truce. Viggo said. I won't harm you, and my men and I will all keep your survival a secret. We won't tell Brandine you're here. No doubt you would like to keep hidden from him as long as possible, especially given your history. Adriana's heart clanged in her chest and she whirled back to face him. My history? What do you know about my history? Viggo said nothing, only gave her a significant look. A look that said, everything. Well, she supposed many across the archipelago knew her history, didn't they? During the convocation, Finn had defended her honor and dueled Brandine for possession of Darren before he was born. Still, how far it had traveled she could never know. Alton Brand. Viggo said, interrupting her thoughts. I may have forced him to tell me everything about you and your family. Brandine was a bit vague in the details as to why he wanted me to aid him in his plans. So? Adriana said, anger rising in her chest. You're responsible for hurting Alton. Why does everyone assume I enjoy carving people up? No. That was Slaver Anton. I may have interrogated the boy, but I never harmed him. Faster than lightning, Adriana reached out and slapped him. Viggo actually flinched in surprise. Just as you never harmed Genevieve, you worthless pig. Adriana roared. Do me a favor and stuff your truces and your pity about my history when you bought my sister-in-law. When you carted her off to this ship. Do you know what it felt like to watch you take her away? To sit there and... She broke off, unable to finish the sentence. She'd forced herself to ignore what was happening to Genevieve, unable to help. Knowing what that sort of horror felt like. Something hot and sharp pierced her heart and she stepped away, memory overcoming her senses faster than she could process. She closed her eyes for a moment and gave herself 3 precious seconds to breathe, to put the pain and memories back in their box. She could not allow her own traumas to overcome her now. Viggo's face was red from the slap but he didn't look angry. Genevieve is safe. She remains untouched. She is back in the cells with your family. She didn't look all right. Adriana said heavily, her voice shaking. I saw her at the square today and I know what that sort of trauma. Please, Viggo said, and to her surprise, his voice was very gentle. Allow me to explain. Adriana didn't want to hear it. She didn't want to hear any justification or explanation from this man. She'd heard enough excuses, lived through enough of them. It was only by the grace and gentleness of kinder men that ever gave her hope of a second chance with Eric, to risk peace and safety to find happiness. To risk not being hurt again. But part of that peace was communication and allowing people to explain themselves. Looking up at Viggo, she eyed him heavily. He stared back without expression. Slowly Adriana drew one of her daggers and approached, setting it against his collarbone. He didn't even flinch. Fine. Tell me your little story. And if it's not the truth, if it's not an acceptable reason for what you've done these last 2 days, I will end you. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to, given what I want and need to save my family. But now I don't care about the consequences, the pain my soul will suffer later for destroying you. You paid gold for my sister, a girl I've come to love. We were made to believe that you'd have your way with her all night if you wished. So tell me your little story. If I hear anything less than an acceptable answer to what you did, then my conscience will be clear. I'll walk out of here with exactly what I need and it'll be bye-bye, Viggo Grimborn. Give me a reason, and maybe I'll consider your little truce. Viggo was the picture of calm, but she could see the wheels turning in his mind. Despite the weapon at my throat, I would appeal to you that you also need me. Your family is wounded and being worn down hour by hour. Your people are a few days away from the slave trade. As you've no doubt noted, you alone are the only one that stands in the way of their destruction. And here you stand with a weapon toward your greatest asset. Your survival is only a piece in the game, one that Brandine Anderson would die to know of. Adriana tightened her hold on the dagger, her palms sweating. It is no threat when I say that Brandine would be very interested to know that you're alive. It is a cold, objective truth. When he finds your son, and I have no doubt that he will, do you think he would not be pleased that his mother lives? Or do you perhaps think that he wouldn't use that knowledge as another weapon to break Hiccup? That is his biggest desire, to break your father down until he is nothing. Keeping you a secret from Brandine is going to be perhaps the most difficult thing I have done up until this point. Brandine is a smart man, that is no doubt. So before I tell you my story, I would urge you not to do anything rash. My men will not be pleased if you kill me, and while they are loyal to me, some will turn you into Brandine in a heartbeat. You have the heart of your father, the stealth of your mother, and the intelligence of both. Do not squander the opportunities you have so easily. Adriana felt a rush of emotions. Fear at hurting a person, rage on behalf of Genevieve and the girl she'd once been, terror for her family, frustration that Viggo made her feel a bit like a child. She merely blinked and waited. Sighing through his nose, Viggo said, "Some time ago, Brandine found me in a far-off land across the seas. He was building an army, led by the fiercest of foes, who would band together to take down Hiccup Horrendous Haddock III, Chief of Burke of the Archipelago, Master of Dragons. Now imagine my surprise that such a young man would find me so many years later and that the name of my old friend would echo across the seas once again. I would hear of him on occasion. I heard of his coronation. The battles that would occasionally take place. A skirmish here and there. Always a whisper over a campfire, that name. Of the hellish barbarian chieftain who trained dragons and had them at his arsenal. How little did those people know the kind-hearted gentleness of that man." Adriana blinked, trying and failing to be softened at the words. "Imagine also my surprise that such a young man should seek me out to join this army to destroy his enemy. My time in the archipelago was fraught with dangers and I brought my fair share. Hiccup's love for dragons would not cease, and he never stopped fighting me for their protection and to rescue them when I succeeded. We fought. We bantered. In a strange turn of events, we came to respect each other. I had never met a sharper young man, and I think he also found himself unable to shake the opinion that he found me equally intelligent. Viggo shrugged at her expression. He didn't seem to care about the dagger at his throat, and indeed, the 3 old scars on his neck told a story of their own. Modesty was never my strong suit. I won't bore you with details of the entire story, but we found ourselves at an impasse. We parted ways as friends. I would take my men and leave the dragons and the archipelago, and he would continue to protect dragons. Adriana shook her head. There has to be more than that. My father was furious when you bought Genevieve. I have known him my entire life and I have never seen him react like that. Indeed. It was a justified response, but you know we cannot speak for hours. I cannot give you the whole story now. If we indeed decide on a truce, on your terms of course, I will one day tell you all you wish to know. But you wished to speak about Genevieve. Adriana adjusted her grip on her dagger and sighed, nodding at him to continue. As I stated, Brandine has done everything in his power these last years to think of all the ways he can hurt your father. It is an unhealthy obsession that unfortunately cannot be healed with time, herbal remedies, distance, or any other healing method. It is a sickness that has poisoned his soul. I suspect you know this already. Of course. It's why he wanted to date me all along. He wanted me to choose between my dad and him, and choosing him would have caused my family, especially my dad, a lot of pain. Indeed. When Alton told me of the convocation, I was not surprised to find out that Hiccup revealed Brandine's identity to the allied clans. He played his cards wisely. It also was no surprise to me that your brother fought Brandine for your honor and to protect your son. You Haddocks are a brave family, and in the story, I see the bold strokes your family took to protect you and your son from Brandine. Which led to him rethinking his entire plan, putting it on hold for years, seeking out every one of Hiccup's enemies, even one such as myself from decades ago to destroy him. Suddenly it all made sense. Why he was so obsessed with destroying your family. Your son made sense from the beginning, but everything between. It is no longer murky. What does all this have to do with Genevieve? Viggo gave her a dry look. Come now, it cannot be that difficult. Imagine for a moment that I do not wish to help Brandine destroy you all. What would that mean? Adriana thought. Well, it would mean that you're trying to help us instead. She frowned. Alton, he was tortured for information about the archipelago and how to get in safely to each village. The assassins that were sent in. Alton told Slaver Anton about the white flags to pass the checkpoints. Yes. And when he'd told Slaver Anton everything, they would have killed Alton because he wouldn't have meant anything to him. But he's still alive. Adriana frowned. You protected him. Why? Because as I told Inga Jorgensen, who also snuck onto my ship a few nights ago, I am trying to keep as many people alive as possible in the coming days. I know your father, and every death will weigh on his soul like a bag of rocks. Also, I learned from him that everyone has a purpose, even if every bit of information is extracted from him. Alton's death would have meant nothing to me or Brandine, but I would not have forgotten him. He is a young man with all of life to live. Who am I to take that from him? Adriana blinked in surprise. As for Genevieve, Viggo said, crossing his arms. The way your brother looks at her is deeper than puppy love, stronger than passion. It is that of a soul bonded to another. Like your parents' love is. Despite the consequences, he did not break, even when Slaver Anton threatened to take her away. That level of integrity is rare, and yet it is also heartbreaking to watch. To choose your ideals over your emotions and your desires. At the auction, I listened to the numbers climb. I forbarred my men from casting any vote. But I know Berserkers and their cruelty. Some things never change, and I could not stomach watching that poor girl shake where she stood. Viggo's mismatched eyes were flat with suppressed fury. So I emptied my coffers for her. To protect her. She stayed safely in my rooms, away from prying eyes, away from unsafe hands and cruel men. I gave her a night of peace. She remains untouched. Tears slipped down Adriana's face. If you're lying. Why would I lie? Viggo asked gently. I have much to lose by protecting her. If Brandine finds out, he will certainly know why I did it. He believes my history with Hiccup is not of friendship but of one in which I abandoned the fight with my tail tucked between my legs. The moment he finds out I am a mole is the second we lose our advantage in saving your parents. I will say no more of the past, but I will say this, I once promised your father that if he ever needed aid, he could count on me to return the favor as he once aided me. I would ask that you allow me to help as best I can, but I can only do that if you keep me alive. We would do better by working together. But the dragons, Adriana whispered, wiping her face with her free hand. I saw them, they're drugged. They're in light sleep paralysis. If I told my men to cease the injections they'd be awake within minutes. Adriana blinked. How did you manage that? Death grip of venom. It's a dragon you likely haven't encountered before, and I pray you don't. Very volatile creatures. But beside the point. The dragons may seem under the weather, but they're perfectly fine. The smallest dose keeps them asleep, almost a dreamlike state. They might not be able to move, which I don't enjoy, but it is the best I can do without harming them. Mind reeling, Adriana could only stare. Finally she looked around the room, noting its beauty. The rug, the plants, the fully stocked bookshelves, the furniture. No dragon heads or leathers were to be found. She weighed everything she knew of her family's history, which admittedly wasn't much, against what she'd witnessed these last few days. Why was Genevieve still hurt? Viggo's mouth tightened. That is not my place to say, only know that she chose it. It is nothing intimate. It is a physical injury that would take a great deal to fake. At her stern expression, he added, it is a burn. Adriana blinked, understanding instantly. Oh. Jen. She believed it would be her best shot at faking, well, I need not explain to you. No. Adriana whispered. She bit her lip, raising the dagger, which had dipped in the last few minutes. Last question, why did my parents never tell us about you? If you're such good friends with my dad, then why do I know nothing about you? Why didn't he tell me? At that, Viggo gave her a smile. Ah, you see, we both have something in common. I am also supposed to be dead, and it is only at your father's hands that I am not. In order to keep the peace, and at my behest, I asked that I would be allowed to bow out gracefully. We agreed that it would be best if it appeared that I had died. Your own mother believes the volcano I fell into was my demise. He gestured elegantly to his damaged eye. It was not without its dangers, but it didn't kill me. So you came to an agreement as friends. He saved your life and you left. Yes, and I parted with the promise that if he ever needed me to return that favor, I would come. Whether he wanted it or not. Adriana shook her head. But he has to know. If that's the case, he has to know that you're faking it. He's under a lot of stress. This last week has been difficult and his greatest fears are coming true before his eyes. Especially after taking Genevieve, I do not blame him for his doubts and feelings of betrayal. I only hope that one day he can forgive me for my schemes. At long last, Adriana dropped her arm, the dagger hanging idly at her side. All right. I believe you. But if you play games with me, I will slap you again. I don't have the time or energy. I understand. Viggo said, straightening his tunic and standing. He held out a scarred hand. Are we to have a truce then, Adriana Haddock? It's Larson actually. Adriana said and paused a moment before taking his hand. Help me save my family and consider your debt to my father paid. Viggo Grimborn smiled, and she suspected that a fair few people got to see such a genuine expression from him. It is an honor to meet you, Adriana Haddock Larson. Let us get to work then. Adriana smiled. For the record, my plan was to kidnap you. To her surprise, Viggo burst into a laugh. Haddocks always did have the most harebrained ideas. Sounds like you knew what you were getting yourself into. I'd like to think so. However, I don't know you or your brother very well. Let's save your people so you both can live long enough to give me a run for my money. Deal.